Hello, thanks for inviting me here. Today I'm going to talk about the ADA and how it relates to interpreters. The ADA stands for Americans with Disabilities Act. I was asked by interpreters to come here to talk today about the ADA and how it relates to interpreters. I want to give a brief overview of what the ADA itself is, and I'll be doing this by giving short explanations. The ADA is made of 5 titles total. The first 3 are related to interpreters, and the last 2 we'll hold off on for right now. Title 1 has to do with employment within private companies and any workers that are involved within those private companies. Understand that private federal companies and the post office do not need to follow the ADA. Before, a company had to abide by the law if they had 25 or more employees. However, this coming summer in July 1992, the amount of employees will be reduced to 15 for private companies in order to follow the ADA. If a company has more than 15 employees, then they are required to follow the ADA. If there are less than 15 employees, the company isn't required to follow the ADA. But if the state has more strict laws than the federal government, the ADA, then they must obey the stricter state laws. Title II has to do with state entities, which is the state and local government. Federal law does not cover state and local government, but the activities, programs, and benefits used by the state and local government are included in Title II. Title III is places of public accommodations. Really, public accommodations refers to any privately owned place, such as restaurants, theaters, or hotels. All 3 of these different kinds of places where people come together are covered by Title III in public accommodations. Title IV is related to telecommunications and relay services. Relay services is when the deaf need to communicate with hearing people and are relayed through an operator. Any state that has these established relay services must be open 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. However, they are able to be closed on Christmas and holidays. Do you all believe me? Yeah, no, that's not true. The relay services must be open every day of the year, including holidays. The deaf must have equal access to telecommunications as all other people. So moving on to the fifth title, this is called the miscellaneous category. This is when a situation doesn't quite fit into any of the other four titles. Then it's moved to this fifth title. For example, federal laws that relate to the executive branch and post office are put here. In the miscellaneous category also is the press, legislative branch, and the Library of Congress. All of these are included in Title V. Because Titles 4 and 5 don't have much to do with interpreters, we won't be discussing them like we will be the first three. There are some really frustrating problems that I've encountered myself. A really common one is when you have a skilled interpreter being thrust into a position where, for instance, when I'm presenting about the ADA, the interpreter may not know the exact terminology to the ADA laws. When an interpreter uses the wrong vocabulary for a sign that I use, it makes me look like an unintelligent person, as if I have the communication skills of a fifth grader. Um, for example, if I sign a specific sign, what I'm trying to say is effective communication when both two parties understand each other. So, like I said, if I sign a specific sign, the interpreter may read it wrong and see when I'm signing effective communication, they may interpret it as successful or communication instead of effective. And if there's someone in the audience that knows the verbiage of the ADA, they might think that I'm actually the one that doesn't know the wording of the law. So you can see that it's important for an interpreter to be knowledgeable in what they're interpreting in order to be able to match the speaker's intention and meaning. And that is one example that's realistic, something that I myself encounter as a deaf person. The first title, remember, is employment. So We're talking about employment of interpreters and the regulations of interpreters. It's really the responsibility of the EEOC to enforce these employment regulations. The EEOC is part of the federal government, which stands for Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. The EEOC deals with the rules, regulations, and payment of an interpreter. Also, if the interpreter has a complaint, they must take it up with the EEOC. It's important to know that the EEOC and the ADA don't have any explanation of necessary qualifications for interpreters. The EEOC has been completely dependent on the certification of interpreters, and that is Title I. Another important concept is the idea of reasonable accommodation, which interpreters must follow. When they're expected to use correct terminology that I would use, that would be a way of reasonably accommodating the client. Of course, for interpreters, it's a very broad subject, reasonable accommodation, but interpreters must know that they need to follow the reasonable accommodation. Another example of reasonable accommodations would be if you had a client in a wheelchair, you would be expected to adjust that desk or table so the wheelchair would fit properly under the desk. So there are many different forms of reasonable accommodation. Uh, when an interpreter or other assistive device or other assistance is needed, it's the responsibility of the employer to provide that reasonable accommodation. Interpreters are used for many different reasons at companies. Sometimes staff meetings, job training, evaluations, and understand that just because one deaf person would request an interpreter doesn't mean that another deaf person would want an interpreter there. if an employer doesn't agree to provide an interpreter, the only proper defense they have is to file under hardship. However, this doesn't mean that the employer just doesn't have enough money or didn't include the payment for an interpreter in their budget. It actually means that the business needs to be collapsing. Under any other circumstances, the business must pay for an interpreter. So the employer's defense of under hardship is part of Title I. Moving on to Titles II and III, it's explained that the regulations and enforcement uh, of the regulations are the responsibility of the DOJ, or the Department of Justice. For that reason, because the Department of Justice enforces both Title II and III, we'll be putting Titles II and III together for now to discuss it. So remember that the second title is called Public Entities, and the third is Public Accommodations. Some people get these confused because they both start with the word public, but understand the difference that Title II, when referring to public entities, it refers to state and local government, while public accommodations refers to private companies. Again, it's the responsibility of the Department of Justice to enforce the regulations of Titles 2 and 3. The Department of Justice must determine the qualifications of an interpreter, and really there are different kinds of certifications, different ways that they will know that interpreters are qualified. The interpreter could be considered qualified by having an RID certification. Is the Registry for Interpreters of the Deaf, or they may have a state certification. They could also even have just some made-up certification that's in that specific area, like sometimes rural areas have different bylaws, and they may be certified under that bylaw. That's actually happened to me before in Iowa. When I saw the interpreter that was certified, she just didn't seem certified to me. So understand this was at a women's conference and I needed a female interpreter. Well, they wanted a female interpreter. I wanted a certified interpreter. So we had to find a female certified interpreter. And in all of Iowa City, there wasn't even one. So we checked all the different businesses, all the agencies, and finally we found a couple we could fly down.